Hi, my name is Sarish Sudhakran, and in this video, we'll analyze the cinematography of the legendary and always inspiring Vilmos Zsigmond. The goal of this brief video is to break down his techniques so you have a starting place to learn more about his work and career. And what a career it was, spanning more than 50 years and almost 100 productions, according to IMDb at least. Vilmos landed in the USA without knowing English. It was a constant struggle, and he worked on many odd jobs while his English improved. He brought two important things with him though. One, his skill with the camera he learned in film school back in Hungary, and two, his secret weapon, his lifelong friend Laszlo Kovacs, who also had a stellar career in cinematography. They motivated and thrived off each other. When one was busy on a project, he would recommend the other and claim the other was the better cinematographer. That's a great idea for newcomers who are finding it hard to land constant work. Both made many B-movies, biker movies, horror and exploitation work, and at that time, Vilmos owned a 16mm Arriflex camera and lenses modified for Technoscope. He also owned lights that fit into his station wagon. He sold the services and gear for $100 a day. Ultimately, the friendship strategy worked, and it got Vilmos his first feature film, The Hired Hand, directed by Peter Fonda. It was only on set that Peter realized this was Vilmos' first feature film, but it didn't matter. From then on, there was no looking back, and Vilmos has worked with the who's who in directing: Robert Altman, John Boorman, Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, and Woody Allen, to name a few. Let us go back to the skill he brought from Europe, referred by many as one of the defining looks of the American New Wave, desperately sought after by the directors who arrived on the big stage in the late 60s and early 70s. It began with McCabe and Mrs. Miller, his breakthrough film, directed by Robert Altman. In this film, he used a combination of techniques rarely seen before, the most popular of which was pre-flashing. He pre-flashed to raise exposure because he needed more light. In addition, he added double fog filters on his lenses to give the image a soft, period look without going overboard. This film was a breakthrough in another sense as well, because Altman introduced Vilmos to the zoom lens. After this point, he used zoom lenses almost exclusively, and even encouraged directors who hadn't tried it before to give it a go, including Steven Spielberg. Vilmos prefers the zoom for its practicality, and because he doesn't have to move the dolly tracks once it has been set. He also used the zoom while dollying to simulate a diagonal dolly move. He always tried to hide his zooms though. On McCabe, he used Panavision Cooke anamorphic zooms, the 40-200 and 50-500mm lenses. He used the same combination on Deliverance as well. On the Black Dahlia, he mostly shot with the Angenieux 24-290 and 17-102mm lenses. And on Kickstart Theft, he used the Canon 30-300mm t2.95-3.7 zoom. He carried prime lenses too, but only used them when there was not enough light. The zooms he used were all anamorphic because it was his favorite format. Most of his work is anamorphic. He believed it represented the closest to the human eye. To get the deep focus look that was popular in those days, he had to stop down to between T4 to T8 and always needed a lot of light. Many directors preferred to work with wide-angle lenses to get more depth of field. Ultimately, Vilmos' style is what he called poetic realism. In his words, the imagery should look real, but with poetry, and you can see that's how he operated throughout his career. He was inspired by Dutch painters, and most notably Caravaggio, Georges de la Tour, and Leonardo da Vinci. The latter's famous sfumato technique is what he tried to recreate in many of his movies, including McCabe and Mrs. Miller, using double fog filters. He also used Tiffin's Soft FX diffusion filters to soften his actresses, either a half or one or up to two. He did use it on his male stars as well, so the reverse shots would match. Overall, he didn't like to use filters much, but he did use them whenever necessary. This includes ND, Grad ND, and polarizers. His primary aim was to create a mood. He didn't like to pre-visualize, and had to see the location and actors before deciding on his lighting. He always tried to light according to the story, and never against it. In some movies, he even went without lights as much as possible. Examples are Deliverance and The Crossing Guard, which was directed by Sean Penn. On Deliverance, he used film processing techniques to mute colors to match the story. When he had sets built, production designers built them keeping in mind his lighting needs. He was a big believer in natural light. He loved to shoot in early morning or the late afternoon to get a mixture of warm and blue lights. He also tried to recreate this in interiors. If the windows allowed in daylight, he tried to mix that with tungsten fixtures. For exteriors, he preferred to use HMIs, but his favorite lighting instruments were the tungsten Fresnels, especially the 10K. Unlike most modern DPs, he hated soft lighting. He thought soft lighting was boring and believed serious dramas, especially those involving crime, had to have hard lighting. He always started with the tungsten Fresnel as his key light. His strategy was to light people first and never the background. He always gave his actors room to move around and not worry too much about their marks. He used an incident light meter to light his set and then brought out the spot meter just for the faces. You can see on many projects he was never afraid to underexpose his stars, creating mystery and mood that wouldn't have been possible any other way. When he wanted to control the contrast, he used a fill light, usually a 5 or 10K Fresnel, punched through 216 or 250 diffusion. This also gave his actors catch lights in their eyes. He never liked to depend on just one source for his lighting, and in this way, he stands apart from every other cinematographer I've covered so far in this series. He lit faces with a 3/4 or side lighting pattern, and always tried to avoid top lighting. He hardly ever used a backlight, but you can see one of his signature techniques was a side rim light and kicker whenever necessary. His lighting was always motivated. He needed to see the light sources, and if they dictated a particular look, that's what he delivered. With all these sources, he tried hard to eliminate double shadows, and hated them. In his latter years, he started to embrace LED lights as well, and even though he used fluorescent lights often, he was never completely comfortable with them. When it came to camera movement, he was a traditionalist and preferred a dolly or Steadicam over handheld techniques. He despised shaky camera work and worked hard to get his movements as smooth and steady as possible. He used the Technocrane in his later movies to get tough shots for long takes, like the ones Brian De Palma loves. All of his great work was shot on film, but he did use digital cameras. For example, he used a Sony f/65 on Kickstart Theft and the Red 1 on The Maiden Dance to Death. However, he didn't prefer the sharpness of digital cameras, but embraced color grading in his last few movies. After all the research that went into this video, I've come to understand why Vilmos Zsigmond is such an inspirational figure to many modern cinematographers. The primary reason being his honesty in his work. The second reason is the odds he had to overcome to make it big. The amount of fortitude it would have taken is unimaginable. For example, he was hired by Spielberg for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but the production wanted to fire him several times. Eventually, he was fired after principal photography was completed. Some of the reshoots were done by other cinematographers, but ultimately it was Vilmos alone who won his first and only Academy Award for cinematography. He was nominated 3 other times as well. Luckily, Vilmos' journey and his work are still largely accessible to us, though mostly ruined by poor DVD and Blu-ray transfers. If you're struggling to find a foothold in this industry, his story is one of the most inspirational I've ever seen. And let's not forget Laszlo Kovacs as well. To know more about their friendship, work, and influence, please also watch No Subtitles Necessary, Laszlo and Vilmos. You can also watch many of his interviews online and read articles about him in the American Cinematographer magazine and elsewhere. I hope this brief video has stoked your interest in his stunning work. It speaks for itself, you know. If there's a favorite cinematographer whose work you want analyzed, let me know. To see more videos like this one, please subscribe. There are lots more on the way. Bye now.